Welcome to this deep dive,
Okay.
and we're going to be exploring climate change
Sounds good.
and what it means for you.
Okay.
So we've got two sources to guide us today. The first is climate change, facts and actions for kids,
Okay.
and that's from the Woodland Trust.
All right.
Now, I know
Yeah.
the title might sound a bit simplistic,
Right.
but trust me, the way they break down these complex topics
Yeah.
is super helpful for anyone.
Gotcha.
And then, to get a bigger picture view, we'll also be looking at WWF UK's work
Okay.
on the UK's global footprint.
All right.
So are you ready to get into it and figure out
Yeah, let's do it.
what we can actually do about this climate change thing?
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating to see how these two sources complement each other.
Okay.
One provides a really clear and accessible foundation,
Yeah.
while the other dives into the data and the specifics of the UK's impact and responsibility.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The Woodland Trust kind of compares climate change to the Earth getting a fever.
Okay.
What'd you think of that analogy?
Well, it definitely highlights the key issue, right?
Yeah.
A rising global temperature
Yeah.
with potentially drastic consequences.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that while climate change is a natural process,
Right.
it's been happening for millennia.
Yeah.
What we're seeing now is this accelerated rate of change,
Yeah.
largely driven by human activities since the Industrial Revolution.
The Industrial Revolution. That's when we really started ramping up our use of fossil fuels, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Coal, oil, gas, all that stuff.
Yeah, and burning those fuels releases greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide,
Right.
which act like a thickening blanket around the Earth,
Yeah.
trapping more heat
Okay.
and causing the planet to warm up.
That's the greenhouse effect in a nutshell, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
But how much of a difference can a
Mhm.
few degrees really make?
That's where things get interesting. Even a seemingly small increase in average temperature can disrupt weather patterns, leading to more intense storms, heavier rainfall, increased flooding.
Okay.
And we're already seeing these changes in the UK.
Yeah.
Remember the heat waves last summer
Oh, yeah.
and those flash floods in the autumn?
Yeah, it definitely felt like the weather was going a bit haywire.
That's climate change in action.
Right.
And it's not just about the UK. Globally, we're seeing similar patterns
Right.
of extreme weather events along with rising sea levels
Right.
as polar ice caps melt and even shifts in the timing of seasons,
Wow.
which can disrupt ecosystems and agriculture.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty serious.
It is a serious issue.
But what about the UK specifically?
Yeah,
That's where the WWF UK's research on the UK's global footprint comes in, right?
exactly.
What exactly does this footprint represent?
Essentially, it measures the environmental impact of our production
Okay.
and consumption patterns.
So, like,
Think about everything we use, eat, wear, buy. It all requires resources and generates waste.
Right.
And according to the WWF UK,
Yeah.
the UK needs to dramatically reduce its footprint
Okay.
by a staggering 3/4
3/4.
by 2030 to
Wow.
stay within the planet's limits.
That sounds incredibly ambitious.
That's a big challenge.
What are the main factors driving this large footprint?
They've identified 10 key areas,
Oh, yeah.
including things like land use, marine resource use,
Right.
material consumption, and greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
What's interesting here is that these drivers aren't just about what happens within the UK's borders.
Oh, really?
We also need to consider the impact of the products we import
Okay.
and the emissions associated with their production.
So even if we make changes at home, we're still contributing to the problem
That's right.
through our consumption of goods produced elsewhere.
Exactly. It really highlights the interconnectedness of the global economy
Yeah.
and the need for responsible supply chains that prioritize sustainability throughout the entire production process.
Right. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
It's clear we need to address the issues here in the UK as well.
Absolutely.
Right. So we've got this big, hairy problem,
Yeah.
climate change.
Okay.
And we know the UK has a significant footprint.
Right.
But what can we actually do about it?
Yeah.
It feels a bit overwhelming.
I understand, but action is the antidote to despair.
Okay.
The Woodland Trust offers some surprisingly practical
Okay.
and impactful ideas.
Okay.
They really emphasize the power of planting trees.
I remember hearing about how trees are like natural carbon capture machines.
Exactly. They absorb carbon dioxide during photosynthesis,
Right.
effectively locking it away and helping to mitigate climate change.
Okay.
But their benefits go far beyond that.
Okay.
They provide oxygen, they prevent soil erosion,
Uh-huh.
they create habitats for wildlife,
Yeah.
and even contribute to our well-being by providing shade,
Really?
reducing noise pollution, and simply beautifying our surroundings.
Planting trees sounds like a win-win situation.
It really is.
What else does the Woodland Trust suggest?
They also highlight the impact of transportation,
Right.
specifically the emissions from cars.
Right.
They encourage us to think about alternatives like walking, cycling,
Yeah.
scooting, or using public transport whenever possible.
Yeah.
They even suggest carpooling if you really need to drive.
Yeah, those are all things I could definitely try to incorporate more into my routine.
Great.
What about reducing waste? That feels like a big one, too.
Absolutely. The Woodland Trust has some great tips for that.
Okay.
Turning off lights and electronics when not in use.
Right.
Recycling diligently.
Yeah.
Repairing items instead of immediately replacing them.
Mm-hmm.
Composting food scraps.
Oh.
Buying less stuff overall and donating unwanted items instead of throwing them away.
Those are all great reminders.
Yeah.
It's easy to slip into wasteful habits without even realizing it.
It's about making conscious choices and being mindful of our consumption patterns.
Speaking of consumption, the Woodland Trust also mentioned something about our diet and its impact on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
What's the connection there?
This one might be a bit surprising to some.
Okay.
They point out that agriculture, particularly meat and dairy production,
Right.
is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions,
Okay.
especially methane from cows.
Wait, so reducing our meat consumption
Yeah,
could actually help fight climate change?
it can make a difference.
I never thought about it like that.
It might sound strange, but it's true.
Right.
Methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas
Okay.
than carbon dioxide. So even small changes in our diets,
Okay.
like exploring meat-free meals a couple of times a week,
Right.
or opting for plant-based protein sources more often can make a difference.
I'm willing to give that a shot.
Great.
What else can we do besides changing our own habits?
Mhm.
Is there anything we can do to encourage wider change?
The Woodland Trust is a big believer in the power of speaking up and advocating for change.
So like talking to friends and family about climate change. Getting involved in local initiatives.
Yep.
Or contacting businesses and politicians to demand more action.
Exactly. They also encourage getting involved in school initiatives,
Right.
attending marches or protests, and using your voice to push for systemic change.
It's encouraging to know that even individuals can play a role in pushing for a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. And remember, every conversation we have plants a seed.
Yeah.
We never know who we might inspire to take action.
That's a good point.
But there's another piece to this puzzle.
Okay.
The WWF UK report goes beyond individual actions
Right.
and delves into the changes needed at a national level.
Okay.
We'll get into that in the next part of our deep dive.
This is all a lot to take in.
It is a lot of information.
But it's also incredibly empowering to realize we have options.
We do have options.
Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll explore what the WWF UK suggests for addressing climate change on a larger scale here in the UK. Okay, so we've talked about the global picture of climate change and some individual actions we can take. But let's zoom in on the UK now.
Okay.
The WWF UK report gets pretty specific
It does.
about the challenges
Right.
and changes needed
Yeah.
right here at home.
That's right. And remember that daunting 3/4 reduction.
Oh, yeah, that figure's still stuck in my head.
In our footprint by 2030,
Right.
a big chunk of that involves tackling issues
Okay.
that are directly affecting the UK landscape
Yeah.
in our lives.
But before we jump into solutions, I'm curious about what climate change is already doing to the UK.
Okay.
We touched on some of the weather weirdness earlier,
Right.
but is there more to it than that?
Absolutely. Those heat waves and flash floods
Right.
aren't just isolated incidents. They're part of a larger trend
Okay.
towards more unpredictable and extreme weather patterns.
Right.
The WWF UK report highlights how this directly impacts land use
Okay.
and degradation.
So how exactly does climate change mess with how we use land in the UK?
Well, think about it. More intense rainfall can lead to soil erosion,
Right.
making it harder to grow crops.
Yeah.
Droughts, on the other hand, can parch the land, making it unusable for farming.
Oh.
These changes force us to adapt how we use our land,
Right.
which can have ripple effects on everything from biodiversity to food security.
It's like a domino effect, right?
Precisely.
One change triggers a whole cascade of consequences.
And it's not just land. The report also delves into the impact of climate change on marine marine resources.
Okay.
Which is especially relevant for a nation like the UK.
Right.
With a strong maritime heritage.
We do love our fish and chips.
So what's happening beneath the waves?
Yeah.
Rising sea temperatures are disrupting marine ecosystems and affecting fish populations.
Right.
This has implications for the fishing industry, the livelihoods of coastal communities, and even the availability of seafood on our plates.
That's concerning. Does the report offer any solutions?
It does.
For addressing these specific challenges in the UK?
It breaks down the necessary actions into those 10 key drivers we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Land use, marine resources.
Okay.
Material consumption.
Yeah.
Greenhouse gas emissions, and so on.
Okay.
Each of these areas requires a targeted approach.
Okay, let's unpack a few of those. We've talked about land use and marine resources.
Okay.
What about material consumption?
Yeah.
How does that tie into climate change?
This is all about the stuff we buy.
Right.
And how much we consume.
Right.
The production of goods, especially those that rely on fossil fuels, generates a significant amount of greenhouse gases.
Okay.
The report emphasizes the need to reduce our reliance on these materials and transition to more sustainable alternatives.
So being more mindful about what we buy and where it comes from.
It's about asking questions: where was this product made?
Right.
What materials were used?
Okay.
How far did it travel to get here? Are there more sustainable options available?
Okay.
The report also talks about the importance of responsible supply chains.
Responsible supply chains?
Yeah.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means ensuring that the products we consume are produced ethically and sustainably.
Okay.
With minimal environmental impact throughout the entire process.
Right.
From sourcing raw materials to manufacturing and transportation.
That makes sense, but how much power do we really have as consumers to influence these global supply chains?
More than you might think.
Okay.
By making informed choices and supporting businesses that prioritize sustainability.
Yeah.
We send a powerful message to the market.
Okay.
And when enough consumers demand change, companies and even governments take notice.
So it's a combination of individual action and collective pressure.
Exactly. And speaking of collective action, let's talk about those greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
We know they're driving global warming, but what can we do about them here in the UK?
Yeah, what can we do?
The WWF UK report calls for a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
They emphasize the need to transition to renewable energy sources, like wind and solar improve energy efficiency in our homes and businesses, and invest in low-carbon transportation systems.
That sounds like a lot of systemic change. At the government and industry level.
But individual actions still matter.
Okay.
We can all contribute by using public transport, cycling, walking, choosing energy-efficient appliances, and making conscious decisions about our energy consumption.
Right.
Every little bit helps.
It feels like we're talking about two levels of action here.
Yeah.
What we can do individually and what needs to happen on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Through policy and systemic changes.
Absolutely. And those two levels are interconnected.
Right.
The choices we make as individuals send signals to the market and can influence government policy. It's a virtuous cycle.
Right.
But there's another layer to consider. How are these changes going to affect different regions and sectors across the UK?
Okay.
We'll explore those nuances in the next part of our deep dive.
This is a lot to digest.
It is.
But it's fascinating to see how these issues connect and how our actions, both big and small, can contribute to a more sustainable future. Stay with us as we dive deeper into the specific impacts and solutions for the UK in the next part of our deep dive.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the science of climate change to the UK's specific challenges. What really struck me is how interconnected everything is. Our individual choices, the global economy, government policies, it's all part of the same system.
That's a key takeaway from the WWF UK report.
Yeah.
They emphasize that reducing the UK's global footprint isn't just about tweaking a few things here and there.
Right.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we produce and consume resources.
Yeah, that 3/4 reduction by 2030.
Yeah.
It's a big ask.
It is ambitious.
But I'm also starting to see how even small changes, when multiplied across millions of people, can create a ripple effect. Exactly. And what's encouraging is that many of the individual actions we discussed earlier, like those highlighted by the Woodland Trust, directly contribute to that larger goal.
It's like those seemingly simple things. Planting trees, reducing waste, being mindful of our transportation choices, are actually powerful levers for systemic change.
Precisely. Think about it. If enough of us start prioritizing sustainable products,
Right.
companies will have to adapt their supply chains.
Right.
If we reduce our reliance on cars,
Yeah.
it creates demand for better public transport and cycling infrastructure.
Okay.
It's a bottom-up approach to creating a more sustainable future.
It makes me feel like I have more agency than I thought.
Yeah.
It's not just about waiting for governments or big corporations to act.
Right.
We can each play a role in driving that change.
Absolutely, and that's where informed consumer choices come in.
Yeah.
Remember those 10 drivers of environmental impact we discussed?
Yeah.
By understanding those drivers,
Yeah.
we can make more conscious decisions about the products we buy,
Okay.
the food we eat, the
Yeah.
way we travel, and how we use energy.
So it's about asking ourselves, does this purchase align with my values?
Yeah.
What's the environmental impact of this product? Are there more sustainable alternatives available?
Exactly, and don't be afraid to ask those questions of businesses, too.
Okay.
Demand transparency, support companies that are committed to sustainability,
Right.
and use your purchasing power to drive change in the market.
It feels like we're talking about a shift in mindset,
Yeah.
not just in our actions, but in how we view our role as consumers and citizens.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that our choices have consequences,
Yeah.
both positive and negative, and taking responsibility for our impact on the planet.
This has been a real eye-opener for me.
Good.
What are some final thoughts you'd like to leave our listener with?
I'd say this, don't get bogged down by the enormity of the challenge.
Right.
Start with one small change, something manageable, that you can incorporate into your daily life.
Okay.
Plant a tree, try a meat-free meal,
Right.
walk or cycle instead of driving. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to a more sustainable future.
And remember, we've included links to both the Woodland Trust and the WWF UK in the show notes.
Right.
They have fantastic resources for anyone who wants to learn more about climate change and explore different ways to get involved.
It's a great place to start.
This has been a fascinating deep dive
Yeah, it has.
into how climate change is impacting the UK and what we can do about it.
It's a crucial conversation.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, remember, the future is in our hands.